Welcome back to Inclusive Design 24, 2022, brought to you in partnership with our Platinum supporters, Intopia and Fable, and Gold supporters, Barrier Break, TPGI, and UX for the Win. You can follow us on Twitter at ID24Conf, and if you have questions for the presenters, the presenter in this case, tweet them using the ID24 hashtag or post them in the YouTube chat, and we will get to them in our Q&A at the end of the session. I am excited to have Meryl Evans with me today as the guest host. Meryl, over to you.
Thank you so much, Adrian. I'm very excited to be here. So next we have Zariah Cameron talking about performative equity and inclusion. Over to you, Zariah.
Hi. Thank you, Meryl. Thank you so much. And thank you, ID24, for allowing me to be a part of this amazing conference. I know, again, we're in the tail end of it, so thank you for being a part. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone across the globe. My name is Zariah Cameron, and today we will be talking about performative equity and inclusion. So a little bit of overview before we dive right into it, right? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am and sort of how this all sits with me. We're going to kind of talk about belonging. What does that mean? And, you know, how does that sit within creating a more inclusive and equitable space, right? And then leaning into examples of how that shows up, how performative equity and inclusion has shown up. And then that discovery phase that we'll be talking about, more of the external design and internal and how they coincide together. And then lastly, sort of just a wrap up and thank you. So a little bit about me, right? I am the equity-centered UX strategist at Ally Financial. And what that really just means is I am in charge, or my role is making sure that our products, our design practice, the way that we design, the way that we research our design and create those solutions are as equitable and inclusive as possible, not just for our customers, but also for our employees as well. And that's what we're really going to talk about today. And so a little bit about me is that I believe that my title is just another label, right? It's a part of who I am. And I believe that I'm more than just my title and more than the label that I present myself. I believe that who I am and my culture is a part of where I sit and how my title sits under that. And it really influences the way that I show up in the world and in the workplace, right? And I believe that it should be respected just as I believe everyone else's way of how they decide to show up should be respected. And that's something that I want you all to keep in mind as we're going through this talk, right? So I love expressing myself and my personality through my naturally curly hair, though right now I do have a straight wavy hair at the moment. I have gold earrings on with a red lipstick, and I am wearing a red jumpsuit with flowers all over the jumpsuit, right? But in the picture here, I have auburn reddish curly hair with clear glasses on, quirky green glasses, and a green blazer with a flowery shirt. And so this is just, again, different ways in which I decide to show up in the office or anywhere. And I also utilize my passion and my gift for writing and storytelling to really inform the value of user voices. But I would love to know in the chat, of course, like how are you, or even just to think about it, right? How are all of you showing up or deciding to show up outside of just your own title? So, jumping into it, right? So again, I said that, you know, belonging is really the core and how everyone is decides to show up in the world and wants to feel welcome, wants to be a part of the places that they're in. And I really think that belonging sits the core of how we allow people to really feel safe, right? And be open and vulnerable. So I want to just take a second, right? What does belonging feel like to you? What does it sound like? What is, the overall feeling and just presence that you feel when you see that word, when you have that experience? What does that look like for you? And that can be different for anyone. But I just want to give it a second for anyone to think about, like, how is belonging? How does it show up? And that could be a word, it could be a phrase, whatever you think. But definitely put it in the chat if you choose to do so, or even if it's just something you would like to think about. So I'll give it just a second. But just wanted to keep in mind, I actually did some intake from a few people of what does belonging feel like to them. And so a few words or phrases really that I gathered from them was feeling, free to be myself, right? Acceptance of my quirks. I'm definitely a quirky person, so that's extremely key for me. Another thing is respect, right? You want people to respect you when being in a certain place, wanting to feel seen or heard. Another one for me is like being able to feel safe or trusting. I see some in the chat of someone says it feels comfortable to belong, right? You feel comfortable. You don't feel tense or awkward, right? You feel this like embracing. Someone in the chat said valued, right? I think that's a really good one too. For me, it would even be feeling a sense of peace, right? You don't have to worry about anything. There's no second guessing. You can just feel free to live your life and express the way that you feel. So let's flip that a little bit, right? What does belonging not feel like to you? Now, we just talked about all the positives, and of course, unfortunately, I'm sure all of us here have had a space, a time where they didn't feel like they belonged, they didn't feel like they were welcomed. So what does it not feel like to you? What does belonging not feel like to you? What does that sound like? Again, it could be a word, it could be a phrase, a feeling, anything to describe that experience. So I'll give it a second too in the chat if people want to drop it in. But again, I did get some feedback from some people of what belonging doesn't feel like to them. And I see some people in the chat, it says, scary, right? Like if you don't feel like you belong, you don't want to be there. And there's almost this fear that comes out of it, right? Another person said isolated. I definitely understand that. Like it really feels like you're kind of by yourself. You don't feel like I know I've had experiences where I may not feel like I have any friends or anybody really talk to because I'm not really welcomed in that space. And it's a sort of like feeling, it's an energy, right? A few things that I got from people: not feeling good enough, maybe imposter syndrome. Someone also said feeling misunderstood, and even going back to that tense or awkward feeling. It all goes back to the energy. Another person in the chat said anxiety or being lonely. So again, all really great responses that I was seeing in the chat as well. And so that leads into, right, this performative inclusion. It leads into, okay, if we're willing to create this inclusive and welcoming space, are we being genuine about that? And so that is where it leads into the actual topic of performative inclusion, performative equity. And we've seen this, right? We've seen how over the course of these last years, especially within the US, we've seen a height of that. With everything that happened within 2020, we really saw a flocking of companies, right? Companies, people really going to support, right? Support these efforts, all these things that were happening, these tragedies that were happening within the US and other places in the world, and supporting and throwing money at the problem, but really not necessarily placing any actionable or long-lasting plans in place that would actually have an impact in the community, right? So essentially, they were trying to avoid any potential litigation or scrutiny from consumers, people that supported them, or any stakeholders that were involved. And so we lean into this definition of performative inclusion or equity referring to it occurs when an organization or person advocates for diversity, equity, inclusion, but there's no practical actions that are undertaken to actively contribute to that achievement, right? So like I said, no long-lasting plans in place. And so really wanting to jump into some examples of that to give you a little bit of clarity, right? So here I have on these slides, I have 2 images of 2 articles with a 2-year difference in them. So the first image is of an article from 2020 talking about the black boxes, Blackout Tuesday. So if anyone who was in the US, I'm not sure if this expanded globally, but I do know within the United States, there was a day that happened within the United States after, unfortunately, the events and the murder of George Floyd. We did have a day called Blackout Tuesday, where multiple different people, whether that was celebrities, just regular people that were on your feed, posted these black squares essentially within solidarity, if you will, to display a form of allyship. And so the actual basis and history for those who may not be familiar why Blackout Tuesday was even created was not really for black boxes. It was actually within the music industry, the entertainment industry, where they were asking, hey, let's stop production. Let's stop any events that are happening out of respect for the murder that just occurred and have there to be absolute silence. And along the way, it kind of got misconstrued and misdirected. And again, like I said, there was no real action behind it. And we see that, once the hype of those 2020 events calmed down, though I don't really think they ever did, they were no longer important because they were no longer important to the largely dominated public. So those communities were still suffering without any sustainable support, right? And so we see this 2 years later, right? And again, this second article here shows most employees think their companies are guilty of performative allyship, right? So we see that there have been improvements over the last 2 years. Companies have been pushing out external efforts and design products to create a more inclusive experience for their customer. However, in that same note, they're exhausting and overworking their marginalized communities, marginalized employees to bring out those very experiences, or even quieting their voices as if they weren't a part of the target audience. This very example is contradicting exactly what they're trying to achieve. And another thing to call out, or even question rather, was the reason for the influx of any marginalized community hire during the height of 2020, was it simply because of the lack thereof or to fulfill a diversity quota? And even if those aren't or weren't your intentions or mindset, did you think of ensuring that you're providing the necessary resources or support to sustain the livelihood of that hire who is a part of a marginalized community coming into a white dominated space? And then we have to additionally ask ourselves, is this the reason for our quick turnover? We've seen a lot of that happening where we've had these new hires come in again, the height of 2020, bringing on Black employees, people of color, into the forefront to diversify their space, their workspace. But they're seeing this quick turnover where people are leaving because of the toxic work environments, or because they're not really saying what they said that they were or who they were. And a turnover could be anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. And something to really pay attention and keep in mind that, nowadays, like, it's not just about how the company can benefit, but it really should be a two-sided partnership, a relationship, not just a one-sided take relationship, but a space where both parties can truly benefit from. Now, something to, in those 2 years, we've seen that there have been so many different communal efforts and external commitments that have been crucial to really just uplifting and creating more inclusive products and practices for our customers. However, it's just important to be committed to the internal inequities that are going on in the workplace. And we've seen that in this discovery, it's more of a duality, right, of two different sectors divided in external design and internal design. External design mostly focusing on creating equitable customer experience within our UX research, interaction with our users, creating a more inclusive design practice that can lead to our principles, the way we practice our research, etc. However, we have to understand that having a dedicated commitment to our communities is just one step and simply the tip of the iceberg for reaching an inclusive space. Both have to coexist to coincide with each other and work together to simultaneously create an optimal experience that is both inclusive and equitable. So going back to internal design as well, designing the employee experience that is both equitable and inclusive as well. For example, utilizing the lingo, language, and culture of any marginalized community in marketing or design campaigns or experiences, but scrutinizing that expression of their culture in the office and calling it or deeming it unprofessional is the exact correlation of what being performative can be and is. So, because think about it, if employees don't feel safe showing up in the workplace, why would you ever think that they would feel safe enough to really show up inclusively or express about certain issues or to create a more inclusive space within our design innovations when they believe they're just going to be shut down anyway? It's not just about designing a better and more inclusive experience for our customers, but also for our employees. Now, let's do a little bit of a deep dive, right? We're going to focus first on the external design. So want to really focus on the research, which I personally have a heart for, especially qualitative research, because I believe that hearing people's stories is so invaluable. And I think it really is a crucial thing of being able to inform the way that we design. So one thing to call out is feedback is a gift. It is a beautiful gift that not everybody gets to experience. And for anyone that gets to have that, is fortunate enough to gain that insight from their target audience, should be, in a way, grateful, because not everybody has the opportunity to do so. And so when we look at that, we have to be considerate in the way that we do our research, right? Especially, for example, when it comes to our quantitative research. You never want to limit your users' opinions, and especially when it comes to identity. You want to be able to give them a broad range of options so that they feel comfortable and safe expressing. For example, if someone identifies as multiracial, but you're only giving them a closed option checkbox to select only Black or white or Asian or Indian, whatever that may look like, you're forcing them to put themselves into a box. And that can oftentimes be extremely triggering. It can bring up memories or even bring up a level of frustration for them. So yes, it may be easier for the researcher to have clear and clean cut data to sift through, but you're essentially limiting the ability to express how they want to show up and how they want to identify. And oftentimes it can leave the user very uncomfortable into finishing the survey. Same thing for qualitative research. We want qualitative research as a chance for participants to really feel, be able to be open and to express themselves, and ultimately a time for them to be vulnerable, right? A lot of times, depending on the type of product that it is, it could be based on an experience that could be essentially traumatic, right? So they're being open, and we should do the same. We should be honest and transparent about our intentions about the research, where that research is going, where their responses are going, and what we're going to do with it. Because the more that we're honest and transparent of what we're doing with that research, the intentionality behind it, the more open and safe that a person will feel about expressing themselves in that environment. Also, allow a person, like I said, going back to their identity, how they want to show up, how they want to identify. For example, asking someone how they would like to describe their disability, or even asking them simply, how do they pronounce their name, which I'll get to in a second. All of those things are being respectful of your participant and allowing them to feel safe and trusting of that space. So again, I kind of mentioned about pronunciation of names, asking someone of how they pronounce their names. So here in this circle, right here in the center is how you pronounce my name, Zariah. That's how you say my name, Zariah, Z-A-R-I-A-H, right? All around are the many ways that someone has mispronounced, misspelled my name. I've gotten Zariah, Zariah, all these different components spelled differently, like Z-Y-R-A, Z-A-H-I-A. It doesn't even feel natural me saying it, right? Like, it feels very awkward. It feels very uncomfortable even. And I'm sure a lot of people on this call could that are listening could even have that same similar experience, especially if you have a more ethnic name. And this kind of goes back to the sort of Starbucks example of, for those who are in the US or even those who have access to a Starbucks, Starbucks is very well known for misspelling, misappropriating names on their cups. And it's always seen as a normality and a badge of honor. It shouldn't be that way, but everyone has unfortunately accepted it because that's just the way that it is. Well, and for me, as a Black person that, you know, has the more ethnic name, it can be uncomfortable and really just frustrating at times. But I do have an example of this local Black-owned coffee shop that is located in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I live, that is doing just the opposite to create more of a safe and more welcoming, unique experience for their customers. So they wrote a Instagram post probably like a week or so ago about how they really want to show up and allow their customers to show up. So this post says, being Black often means our names are mispronounced, misspelled, given unwanted abbreviations or nicknames. With this in mind, it was important that we created an opportunity to make our people feel seen by asking for their spelling and pronunciation of their names. I don't know how many times we hear, wow, thanks for asking. It's our hope that the intentionality we created is felt in every area of the business. Thank y'all for showing up and showing out every day. Now, when I read this, my heart absolutely swelled, right? Like, I can't tell you the number of times I've heard my name mispronounced, seen it misspelled. I probably could be a millionaire at this point. And even for a short time of my life, I was even tempted to change my name because it was mispronounced and misspelled on a daily so often. And for a young person at my young age, coming into my own, it became really difficult to see how it show up or how I was even allowed to show up. And now that I'm older, you know, I've realized the importance of my name and how it's really tied to my identity and my culture as a Black person. But it can be often frustrating. So seeing this post, you know, really allowed me to feel seen. And it probably is making a lot of other customers that are coming in feel seen. And it even creates this type of environment that brings on consistent and loyal customers and people wanting to just come back. So though this is not a digital experience, it's still a delightful user experience that can be applied to the intentionality of our own work. So another example that I want to bring up of inclusive UX. So here we have Sevilla. They're a nonprofit design organization that is based in Detroit, Michigan, here in the United States. And they focus on more government reform and design. And so they turn a 40-page assistant application for Michigan into an 8-page breather for Michigan residents. So this was for residents of Michigan to receive healthcare coverage, food assistance, childcare, etc., all the things. And so obviously these were people's livelihoods. And so this institutional design was dozens of pages that demanded significant amount of time. I mean, 40 pages. Imagine having to go through and fill out 40 pages of information simply to just receive the assistance that you need to live. And on this 40-page document application, it was asking invasive questions such as, what's the date of conception of your children? And this was specifically asked for mothers who were not married, right? Which left applicants feeling disrespected and distrustful of the very system they were trying to receive assistance from. And oftentimes this took significant amount of time and mental energy for not only the applicants that were applying, but also the staff that were reviewing these applications, which a lot of times, because of this long application, they weren't able to really give the proper help and assistance to various people that needed it. And so I am so good friends of mine, Savella, and they just really refreshed and gave a breather to so many people that needed it. And I think this is such a great example of how we should reform our systems and create better inclusion and equity for everyone. And one thing to call out, right? If your target audience is marginalized communities, yet you don't have anyone in the room that really reflects that audience, that is where either you need to have the research and interview with that target audience, or if it's in the workplace, you need to have other voices advocating for that and allowing them to be heard and seen in that room, which we'll go over later on very soon. So when you're, and lastly to call out, when your users tell you what they need and what they want, listen. Don't go based off what you think that they need. So some key reminders to kind of call out. Understand that you are consciously learning, right? This is totally important to pay attention to, that we are always growing, we're always learning, and that this is a process, right? We're not experts in this space, and you should always be open to learning more, expanding your mind, and really growing, because that's what it takes to really build and start focusing on creating more equitable work, acknowledging and crediting those communities, right? So there's so much work that has already been done, so much research that has already been done by communities and organizations that are doing the groundwork right now. And so it's key to point out that you should be focusing on crediting and acknowledging and giving that respect to the communities that you're kind of bringing their work into the full forefront. And lastly, a major part of this work is self-reflection, self-awareness, and learning from people's experiences through open dialogue. So some questions that you could ask yourself, or even in a larger team, right? Are we doing, an audit on uncovering any inequities and in any current products or projects, right? Do we have a wide range of research participants that reflect a diverse audience we're targeting? How are we allowing our users to feel seen or heard in our research? Are there any of our products, language, or anything else that is causing harm or damage to our communities? Even having a reflection at the start of project launches is such an important and crucial part. And asking those questions of what position does our team or our company sit in this problem statement, and how am I positively or negatively impacting the overall solutions that are being created? So leaning more into our internal design, right? So when we think about the phrase "with not for," that phrase has come out so many times, right? Especially when it comes to the same community, and designing with our communities and not for them, bringing them into the forefront, right? That same mantra, that same phrase should be applied to our employees and our teammates, asking them for what they need. And so we're going to get a little bit into this, right? So first I want to start off with our principles, the way we practice design, right? It informs how we really show up as designers within the workplace, wherever, whether that's corporate, nonprofit organization, agency, whatever. The very practice and values that we live by should be embedded, always should be embedded with inclusion and equity at the forefront of what we do, always, right? Oftentimes, we have these principles, we have these beautiful principles listed out. I mean, they may be the most amazing things we had ever created, but they're never reiterated in project launches or kickoffs, or, they're never brought up as a reminder of like, okay, let's actually take a step back and does that suggestion or does that solution really align, right, with our set design principles? Oftentimes, principles become this propped up trophy that we're proud of, but we never use. And this is where, even if our principles, right, our very principles don't necessarily have equity or inclusion within, the line of phrases that we have, maybe it looks like in a different way of creating specific inclusive design principles for people to follow separately for your design principles, so that people are being even more intentional and direct of how they go about creating inclusivity. And so things to, like I said, ensuring that, your principles do align. So we do talk a lot about when we talk about internal design, often things that get missed, right? When talking about employees, creating that employee experience, we forget about the hiring process. We forget that that is where it starts. The employee experience, creating an equitable experience starts, at the hiring, at the interviewing phase, right? So the employee experience is about hiring, onboarding. We have to be honest. We have to be transparent about where they are in the process, especially if they don't get selected, right? Say they're at the end of, the last round and they don't get any sort of comment, any sort of feedback. I think it's crucial to say, like, even if it's a brief why or brief feedback to the person that didn't make the final round of why they didn't get selected, is so much of a breather for that candidate to know how to improve for the next time. And it shows that, that you all still care and that you're still, being honest of what it really is, instead of giving that candidate the runaround. Another thing is that your hiring panel should be a diverse group of people to bring forth perspective and balance, to reduce any unconscious bias that may appear. And if we're wanting to create a more inclusive environment and design solutions, our candidate pool should reflect just that as well. Also, within the actual interviewing process, we should be asking questions about their experience or their thoughts regarding inclusion and equity within design. This will help to weed out any of those that may not align with your values. And anyone can say that they're committed to inclusion, but what do their actions say? What does their work say to really display that? Another thing, once they actually get embedded, they're hired on, and they're starting to onboard into the company, give people time to adjust. A lot of times we have this preconceived notion that just because someone has 3 to 5 years of experience, they can adjust just like that, but that's not always the case. Every company has its own style, own way of doing things, and you have to give people time to really just adjust and immerse themselves into the experience, and really settle into that, to adjust to the changes. So now, for those who have ever watched Hamilton, the Broadway play, there's this song called In the Room Where It Happens. So I wanted to give like a little play on words, but in the room where it happens, some key things to call out, right? Some questions to really ask yourself in team meetings, in forums, in kickoffs, any space where you have a collaborative environment where people are working together, right? So ask yourself, are teams feeling seen and heard in meetings? And not just seen and heard, but like, really, is there suggestions, feedback, being valued and being heard and actually implemented. And if they're not being implemented, being honest and transparent, again, going back to the transparency of saying, okay, we may not be able to implement this, but maybe we can do something else. Or being open to actual ideas, even if it may be different from your own. And also realizing and acknowledging that everyone's way of expressing may look different for everyone. So some people may not be comfortable expressing themselves publicly, or others may not, and that's okay. And that should be respected. And creating multiple, allowing yourself or your team to create multiple avenues for people to express themselves is always helpful. For some, that may be an open forum. For others, it may be an anonymous survey, but allowing them to choose the way they show up should be respected. Another thing is there only one or a group of people dominating the conversation? Are you ensuring that there's a shared power, a shared community of space where everyone can show up and share ideas on an equal level playing field? If there is one person or group of people dominating, there may be some things that need to be put into question, and actually asking, like, is there anything that you would like to say? Is there something you would like to add? And bringing that into the open. And lastly, building trust and belonging starts with creating a place of psychological safety to where that can be able to thrive. Safety starts with building trust starts with safety. And so that can look different across generations, across cultures. I, for example, being a Black woman, being a young Black woman in the position that I am, it can be difficult. And so ensuring that I have people to help me navigate that, allowing people to be there, to be in my corner, is always helpful and eases that pain or eases that relief or stress that I may have of being in a new environment or being in an environment where people are older or in different positions. And that allows me to grow and to thrive as I evolve into my role. And so lastly, some reminders for external design. Designing a great experience for teammates is just as important as it is for your customers. Quieting key voices in the room that are beneficial could just hinder you from creating a better user experience for your customers. And lastly, everyone's experience has added value to the conversation. So as I'm closing out, I want to bring it back to the actual forefront of performative inclusion. How are you deciding to create not just an inclusive environment for your customers, but also your employees, and allowing both of those to coexist and ensuring that you're asking those questions, you're doing that reflection, that self-awareness for not only your team, but yourself as well, and being open to people's experiences, not just your own. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Adrian.
No, that's fine. I think we're both excited because we're both pretty engaged with this. Anyway, thank you. That was wonderful. I appreciate that. I also appreciated your cadence and shouting out to the audience sometimes as well. And creepily close to the camera. Hey, Meryl, do we have any questions?
We sure do. So the first one, you just talked about the room where it happened, and now I've got the song going in my head. So in terms of meetings, you talked about rushing for people who are dominating the conversation, absolutely. But we also have to be careful because calling on the quiet people is not always a good idea, because some people do get terrible anxiety when they're put on the spot. So how would you ensure the quiet ones are included, Zariah?
Yeah, and again, that goes back to everyone shows up in their own way, right? And they should be respected. And I think sometimes we forget about the introverts. Sometimes introverts don't always feel safe, like in environments, because oftentimes workplaces are cultivated simply for extroverted people. And so creating that space, even if it's on the side, right? Like, so if you're a manager, kind of being like, hey, is there any ideas like that you would like to bring to the forefront that you want to discuss? Or even, like I said, going back to the survey aspect, like sending out an anonymous survey to everyone on the team, like saying, if you have any additional feedback, if you have any additional ideas that you would like to share, put it in this survey, put it in this form, so then they don't have to feel like the anxiety of speaking up or expressing ideas or it even being shut down. And then allowing them to kind of, when they're ready, to express that.
Wonderful. So I really love your coffee shop example. I shared a link on Twitter so people can look at it, and I can relate because my name, people spell it a million different ways. Automatic caption spell it a million different ways. So I get it. And so when I went to the coffee shop, I tried to spell it out and never got it right with the noise and everything, and makes it worse. So that's why I love the coffee shop app, because it gets my order and my name right every time. Of course, I would like to engage with people, but sometimes it's just too much work, and it's just easier to go with the app. So somebody says, what are your thoughts on influencing folks in leadership who cling onto the performative side of inclusion?
Yeah, and that can be really difficult depending on who your leadership is, what they're doing. It's important, and I can only go based off my experience, but it's important to really like advocate for those people and bring those things to the forefront that like, hey, okay, yes, we have amazing, like calling out the good things, right? We have amazing efforts to our community, but really maybe it's grabbing data and getting people's stories like within the office anonymously, right? And sharing those stories and saying like, hey, based on this, based on these numbers, based on some stories that were shared, we have to do better with creating a more sense of belonging within the internal workplace, not just to our customers. And being able to like really showcase we need to implement certain initiatives the same way we want to do for external efforts.
So a couple compliments from your chat. Very engaging talk, Zariah. Thank you from one person. And another person said, yes, we started an anonymous feedback forum for our staff meeting. I love that. What a great idea.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah, isn't it? And I have naturally curly hair like you, as you might have noticed. So that's what I came with today. And I just wish people can just be with themselves. I remember talking to my daughter, and I said, I always feel like I have to straighten my hair because it seems more sophisticated. And she said, is that society's definition, or is that your definition? And I think you're right. It might have been because of society and not because, right? And it's so much easier to do curly hair than spend hours straightening and so. Next question for you: what additional way can we ensure employees and customers are feeling seen and heard?
Yeah, so I would say when it comes to employees, like well, when it comes to customers, right? So even within our research, allowing them to feel seen and heard. A good example of that would really just be asking them for what they need in interviews. Like I said, being transparent within our interviews. What are we doing with our research? Gaining insight. A lot of times we go based off of like I said, what we think that they need rather than actually implementing what they actually need. And oftentimes that can cause more hurt than harm. And you can't just go based off of your own experiences. Like, for example, if you're designing a site for someone, let's say, I went to an HBCU, right? An HBCU is historically Black college and university. If you're creating a site or something for HBCU students, it should be reflected, or you should respect, those schools, and they should be highlighted just like everyone else. And so you should ask students or ask even alumni, like, what were their experiences like, and gathering that information rather than just going based off of data or even like things that you may see on a site. A lot of times I've seen designers, researchers, whatever the case may be, they go on these sites and they look it up on Google rather than actually asking the actual people what they want or what they would like to see. And it can lead to misrepresentation. It can lead to someone feeling offended by it because they weren't represented correctly, or what was said, the language that was used, or the images that were used are completely disrespectful to the actual heritage or culture that the target audience is coming from.
Absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly. There's no substitute for actual feedback. So I always tell people when they want to get perspective from deaf people, don't need to have a variety, because when you met one deaf person, you've met one deaf person. I mean,
Yes, that is so, and I'm so glad you literally called that out. Like, oh my gosh. Yes, I would say like just because, like, I always say this too, like, just because I'm a Black woman and I have my experience, there's another Black woman who has a whole different other experience than me. And you just can't base like a Black experience based on one person. That's why it's important to get various different voices, even within that same community, just like with the disability community.
Absolutely. And so many people make the assumption that I know sign language. I don't.
We
And
can't.
they're
We
shocked.
can't.
It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It just is. It's what works for me. And we should
Yeah.
respect each other's communication preferences and adapt accordingly, right?
Exactly.
So, and another thing that resonated with me of what you said is to keep learning, especially language, because language is changing so much now as we're trying to have more respect for language. And sometimes we don't know what's not good anymore, especially with ableist terms. And people don't realize ableism is just like racism, ageism, and sexism. It's just as bad as those. And I love what Lizzo did when she had an ableist word in a brand new song. She apologized. She
eliminated it
super fast. She just handled it beautifully. And that's the way it should be. That's why I say progress over perfection.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah, with their accessibility icon in there. So we're always learning, and we need to be more forgiving and accept that we make mistakes sometimes. But the only way we can stop is if you teach us or I teach you.
That's important, like, as something to call out, is that we're gonna make mistakes, right? And that's okay, but like acknowledging those mistakes, acknowledging that you were wrong, acknowledging that, okay, things are different and we should learn to adjust and make those changes. But if we never acknowledge it, we can never move forward.
Exactly. And after Lizzo did that, it happened with Beyonce too.
Yeah.
And it was a totally different way of handling it. And it didn't go over as well as Lizzo. And the funny thing was, it was the same word. So it was like, how is that her team didn't learn from that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was disappointing. But hopefully by now everybody's learned. And
people can learn. You learn from people's mistakes, and that's why you always research. That's why you always read. It's key, like, pay attention to what's going on. Like, this type of work, it's not just like, oh, I went to a workshop and now I know everything, or oh, I spoke to one disabled person and I know everything about the disabled community. Like, it's not just about that, right? It's continuously doing that work, and you have to be dedicated to that work. You have to want to really advocate and make an impact. And it has to be a continuous thing. It can't just be, okay, we did this one thing and that's it. So that's why I think it's really key to still do the groundwork, still continuously learning, and learn from other people, even if they're younger than you, because as young people, like, we have things to say too, and that's important. So don't be afraid to learn from people that are different than you, because they always have something to say.
Absolutely. I am with you on that, Zariah. It was a pleasure to have the conversation with you. And I'm going to hand it over to Adrian.
I'm the old guy who's going to come in and ruin everything now. That was a wonderful talk. I appreciate it. For those of you watching at home, or hopefully not in your car, if you like this session, hit that YouTube like button, the big thumbs up thing. And don't forget, you can subscribe to youtube.com/inclusivedesign24 to be kept in the loop on our future events. A reminder that ID24 is a respectful community, and you can find our code of conduct on the Inclusive Design 24 website. Inclusive Design is brought to you with thanks to our supporters: Intopia, Fable, Barrier Break, TPGI, UX for the Win, Equal Entry, Infoaxia, Intuit, Law Office of Laney Feingold, Adrian Roselli LLC, and WebAble. Inclusive Design 24 will be back on the hour with our next session, and we've got to go, but we look forward to seeing you then.